President Trump thought he could shut her down with a finger snap instead, Congresswoman. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, delivered one sentence, and triggered a national conversation. No one could ignore. No one quite knew how the day would turn not. The press, waiting behind the ropes, not the staffers. Adjusting chairs in the Roosevelt room, not even the president himself, but if anyone had an inkling that something real was about to go down, it might have been Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't there. To make friends, not today. She'd flown in from Dallas the night before, barely slept, and walked into the White House that morning with a leather folder tucked under her arm and the kind of steel in her spine. You don't fake the event was billed as a bipartisan roundtable on education reform, a show of unity, supposedly publicly. The goal was to discuss funding, equity, teacher shortages, and how to modernize school infrastructure. Privately, though, both parties had walked in prepared to circle their wagons. The room had its regular power players, senators from Ohio and Florida, a representative from a district in Kansas, Secretary of Education, looking polished and prepped, and at the head of the table, President Donald Trump, mid-second term. Flanked by advisors, Jasmine took a seat toward the far end, but not quietly. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady. She greeted a Republican rep from Arizona with a simple good morning and gave a slight polite smile. Then she opened her folder. No theatrics, just bullet points, local data, and personal letters from teachers in her district, real stories. Written in blue ink, a staffer opened the meeting, the usual spiel about working together and common goals, and then handed it over to Trump. He launched into a speech. It was familiar ground talk of record funding levels, school choice, and bureaucratic waste. His tone was energetic but defensive, as if expecting pushback before anyone spoke, and Jasmine, she listened. She let him speak. She let the others take their turns, to some throwing compliments, others offering minor critiques, but once her turn came, she didn't ask for permission. She just started. Mr. President, she said, I represent a district where some schools can't afford air conditioning and where teachers buy supplies out of pocket because they don't have basic materials. There was a pause, not long, just enough for someone in the back to glance up from their notepad, and yet she continued, we keep hearing about school choice like it's going to save everyone. But if public schools aren't funded equitably, we're setting whole communities up to fail. Her tone was respectful but unwavering. She spoke with rhythm, the way a lawyer makes a case. She even read from a letter written by a fifth-grade teacher in South Dallas, who'd used her own paycheck to buy chairs for her students. Trump looked toward his right, then back at her. Are you finished? He asked. I'll wrap up in 10 seconds, she said. But I do think it's fair to ask, why is it still this bad, and when do we stop pretending it's working? There was a beat of silence. Not hostile, not loud, just still. The Secretary of Education cleared her throat. A senator from Missouri shifted in his seat. Jasmine sat back calmly, her hands folded on the table. She wasn't grandstanding. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She just asked the kind of question people back home had been yelling into the void for years. Trump didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he turned slightly in his chair and muttered something to a nearby aide. The aide nodded seconds. Later, 2 members of White House security entered through the side door, quiet but visible, and that's when it became clear he wasn't going to argue with her. He was going to remove her. But the second those guards stepped forward, everything changed. Jasmine didn't flinch when the guards came in. She didn't raise her voice, didn't get out of her chair. She just looked at them, then looked back at Trump like she hadn't finished her sentence. One of the guards, a younger man with a shaved head and a White House pin on his lapel, took a cautious step forward. His eyes were scanning the room, not aggressive, but clearly waiting for some kind of signal from her or from someone else to make the next move. Trump leaned back slightly in his chair and tapped his index finger twice on the table. The meaning was clear. Congresswoman, the guard said quietly, we're going to need you too. But Jasmine raised one hand, not to stop him, but to cut in first. I'm fine, she said. Her voice was calm, like she was reassuring him more than resisting. I'm just asking a question. At that moment, you could hear chairs creaking, papers being suddenly shifted. The kind of ambient movement that comes when people feel something might be about to go too far. Then out of nowhere, Senator Howard Keller from Wisconsin, a Republican, known more for his golf game than anything else, spoke. She didn't threaten anyone. Did she? The room shifted again. Trump looked in Keller's direction, Eyebrows raised. Geller added, I thought we were here to talk. It's called a round table for a reason. Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't respond. The air felt denser. Now one of his advisors leaned in to whisper something, but Jasmine, still seated, turned slightly so everyone could hear her again. I wasn't attacking you, Mr. President. I asked a question. I'm here representing thousands of families whose schools look like they haven't seen a fresh coat of paint since the early 90s. That's not disruption. That's doing my job. The guard shifted on his feet, looked back toward his supervisor near the door, then too. Jasmine again. He clearly didn't want to escalate. And she wasn't giving him a reason to. Another Republican across the table, Rep. Melissa Darnell from Utah, added cautiously, She's making a point we all know exists. It may not be comfortable, but it's real. That's when. Jasmine stood up, not abruptly, not defiantly, just steady, like someone standing behind their truth. If asking about equity in public schools makes you uncomfortable, she said, then maybe that's the conversation we need most. Her voice didn't crack. Her posture didn't waver. Cameras in the room, which had mostly been fixed on Trump, started to pan toward her. You could see in the feed that C-SPAN had switched to a wide shot. Everything was being recorded. Trump tapped his finger again, twice fast, but the guards still didn't move. Whether it was hesitation or confusion, it was clear they were unsure. And Jasmine, she didn't wait for them. I'll excuse myself, she said, but I won't apologize for speaking truth in a room that claims to care about kids. With that, she picked up her folder, slid her chair in, and calmly walked toward the back of the room. No yelling, no dramatics, just quiet tension. She passed one of the younger aides on the way out, a woman barely in her 20s who gave her a look. Not pity, not admiration, just something. Like understanding. Once the door closed behind her, there was stillness again. For a few seconds, no one said a word. Then Trump, eyes locked on the empty chair, said flatly, we can move on, but nothing about that meeting was going to move on the way they thought it would, because by the time Jasmine hit the sidewalk, her name was already trending online. Jasmine hadn't even made it out of the white house gates before her phone buzzed 3 times in a row. Then again. She didn't check it yet. She just walked, eyes ahead, her folder tucked under her arm heels, clicking steadily against the stone like a metronome outside. A small knot of reporters who hadn't been allowed in waited near the barricades. They hadn't seen what just happened, but they could sense it from the way the security guard escorting her kept a step behind, silent. Like he didn't quite know if he was guiding her or just witnessing her back inside the Roosevelt. Though things weren't so steady, Trump was irritated. That was obvious to everyone around the table. He fidgeted with his notes. His responses to the next speaker came off clipped, even mocking at one point. When Rep. Darnell tried to bring up school lunch subsidies, he cut her off with, we're not here to talk about cafeteria food. You could practically hear the PR alarm bells going off in the back of the room. Staffers whispered, and aide slid his phone across the table toward the president. It was a news alert from a political blog already picking up the story. Breaking: Trump removes reproved Jasmine Crockett from education. Roundtable. After tense exchange, he read it, his jaw tightened. Not in rage, but in calculation. The plan had been simple: keep things civil, let both sides speak just enough to maintain appearances, then leave the room with a few headline friendly quotes about working together. What he hadn't expected was someone like Jasmine Crockett to walk in and actually talk about the things voters back home lose sleep over. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't even refused to leave. And somehow that made it worse for him. One of his longtime advisors leaned in and asked, do we want to comment now or wait till press briefing? Trump didn't answer. Meanwhile, outside, Jasmine checked her phone for the first time. The notifications were overwhelming mentions from public school teachers across the country. A video someone had recorded off the C-SPAN stream already posted and reshared thousands of times. A message from her chief of staff: you're everywhere. And I mean everywhere. CNN wants you on tonight. MSNBC calling now. She sat down on a low stone bench near the East Wing parking circle just to breathe. It was chilly, but she barely noticed a Capitol Police officer passed by, nodded suddenly, then kept walking. That's when she opened Twitter. The clip had already racked up over 200,000 views in less than 30 minutes. The headline under it read, if asking about equity in public schools makes you uncomfortable, then maybe that's the conversation we need most. Jasmine Crockett, and there she was, standing in the room firm, but calm, speaking to the President of the United States and refusing to be treated like a disruption just for doing her job. In a video reply, a woman in Detroit, probably in her late 50s, sat in a car with tears in her eyes. "I've been waiting my whole life to hear someone say that in front of him," she said. Another clip came from a teacher in Flagstaff who simply wrote, she said, "What we've all been thinking, that's leadership." Back in the Roosevelt room, Trump was still fuming beneath the surface. He kept throwing glances toward the door where Jasmine had walked out at one point. He muttered, "She made it about race," to which Senator Geller replied, "No, she made it about schools." That shut the room down for a moment, but Jasmine wasn't thinking about that anymore. She was on the phone with her mom, baby. Her mother said her voice thick with emotion. "Did you just challenge the president on live TV?" Jasmine chuckled softly. "I asked the question." "Mama," there was a pause. "Well, her mom said you asked the right one," but while Jasmine was finally catching her breath, the noise outside was only just beginning by the time Jasmine reached her hotel in Foggy Bottom. The clip had hit over 1 million views. Every cable news channel had it playing in a loop, each with their own spin. CNN called it a seismic moment, Fox News said. She had disrespected the presidency, but the footage didn't lie, and neither did the silence that followed her words inside her room. She kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the lights. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Eva Gordon, her communications director. "I hope you're sitting down," Eva said before. Jasmine even said hello already. "Am they calling it the line of the year, Jasmine?" Exhaled slowly. "You mean the line that got me kicked out, girl? That line just put you on every living room TV screen in America." Jasmine stared at the dim city lights outside her window. "I wasn't trying to make a moment, She trailed off. "You just said what nobody else in that room had the guts to say," Eva said. "And the internet knows it." But even then, Jasmine didn't smile, not fully. She wasn't naive. Viral moments come and go. This wasn't about fame. It was about whether the point would stick, whether the system would keep pretending not to hear back at the White House. The press briefing room was packed. Reporters fired questions at the press secretary, all circling the same storm. Why was Raphael Crocker asked to leave? Was she removed for asking about funding inequality? Will the White House issue a statement? The press secretary danced around every question, saying only that the roundtable was meant to be collaborative and disruption was handled appropriately. It was weak. Everyone saw it that night. Jasmine went on MSNBC Live via Zoom. She was in a simple navy sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back. The host, Nina Conway, greeted her like a returning guest, even though they'd never met Congresswoman Crocker. "I want to thank you first for not only being with us, but for holding your ground." "Thank you, Nina. It wasn't planned. It just came out." Honest Conway leaned forward. "When you said, if asking about equity makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's the conversation we need most." "Did you know that would hit the way it did?" Jasmine shook her head. "I was just tired of pretending there are kids in my district eating lunch from vending machines and sitting in classrooms without functioning heat. If asking about that is too much, then maybe the system's more broken than they're willing to admit." The interview went viral all over again in a church basement in New York. A group of public school parents watched the replay projected on the wall in a break room at a community center in Albuquerque. A janitor paused his shift to listen. Even in a diner off I-55 in southern Missouri, a white waitress named Connie turned up the TV volume when a customer grumbled about another loud liberal. She replied flatly. She wasn't yelling. She was telling the truth. Jasmine was in the air again the next morning, heading home to Texas. The flight attendant recognized her. "You're the Congresswoman, right?" Jasmine nodded. "I saw the video. My son goes to a Title I school. What you said, thank you." Jasmine smiled softly. "Tell him we're not done fighting." She sank into her seat, closed her eyes, and for the first time since leaving that room, she let herself breathe deeply. This wasn't over, not even close, but something had shifted. She could feel it, and while Trump might have thought he'd shut her down by signaling those guards, he'd done the opposite. He'd given her a stage, and she'd used it to shine a light so bright no one could look away. But what came next wasn't something even she could have predicted by mid-afternoon. The moment had taken on a life of its own in Washington. The political class was scrambling. Staffers inside the Capitol swapped texts like wildfire. One aide to a senior Republican senator messaged bluntly, "Did POTUS really try to have her removed?" For asking about school budgets, the reply came just as fast, "Yep, it's on video already. 2 million views at the White House." The communications team held a closed-door meeting that lasted nearly 2 hours. They were trying to figure out how to spin it. Some argued that painting Jasmine as aggressive could work, but others pushed back, especially the ones who actually watched the clip. She didn't even raise her voice when staffers said she didn't grandstand. "It's going to be hard to make this look like a tantrum." Meanwhile, back in Dallas, Jasmine's district office had turned into a media circus. Her legislative assistant, Brittany, tried to hold off a line of local reporters and camera crews crowding the sidewalk. "She's not here," Brittany repeated for the 5th time, and "No, don't have a comment yet." Inside, the phone rang. Constantly, constituents left long voicemails, some cheering, others asking if she was okay. One call came from Mr. Deshaun Wilkes, a retired principal in Pleasant Grove. Brittany picked up. "I just wanted to know," he said slowly. "We've waited our whole lives for someone to say that in front of a man." I came in not blink, but the response wasn't just local. All across the country, people began uploading videos, stitching the clip of Jasmine with footage of dilapidated schools, peeling ceilings, and broken lockers. A viral hashtag emerged before sunset, "Ask the Real Questions," over on Reddit. A teacher from Flint posted a photo of a classroom whiteboard with a hole punched through one corner. "My students deserve better." Right? Even late-night TV hosts jumped on it. On the Night Report with Julian Ray, the comedian-turned-commentator, played the clip, paused it, and turned to the camera. "You're telling me a black Congresswoman asks why schools look like war zones, and the response is, 'Get her out. This ain't politics. That's cowardice.'" The audience roared, but the moment wasn't about applause anymore. Something was unraveling, and the political world felt it even inside Trump's circle. A few allies voiced quiet concern off the record. A GOP strategist told Politico he picked the wrong person to silence. "She didn't attack, she asked a question, and now the country's asking it too," but not everyone saw it that way on conservative radio hosts twisted the narrative. One caller in Mississippi claimed she was race baiting. Another show labeled her performative, but even their audiences seemed split. In one calling segment, a woman named Gina from Des Moines pushed back. She was calm. She had numbers. She says, "Yours, if that's performative, then maybe we need more performances like that." And in a coffee shop in Santa Fe, 2 teachers watched the video on a tablet. One of them, Louise, had taught for 16 years. He turned to his colleague and whispered, "I've said less than that in board meetings and been told to watch my tone." She didn't flinch. That matters. Jasmine stayed off social media for most of the day. She was in the air again, heading from Dallas to Tulsa for a scheduled visit with educators that had been on her calendar for months. Now, though, it had a whole new weight on the plane. She scrolled through her messages, among them a voice memo from Senator Geller. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his tone measured. "I know today got heated, but you asked something that should have been asked a long time ago, I hope. You know, not all of us wanted you silenced." She played the message twice, then stared out the window. What she had said had been simple, but the ripple it caused, it was loud, wide, and spreading faster than anyone could contain. But Jasmine hadn't yet seen the people this was really reaching. Kids' parents teach. The following morning in Tulsa, the hallway outside the school auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. It wasn't a press event. It was a visit Jasmine had scheduled weeks ago, part of her effort to meet with teachers and community leaders across states impacted by funding disparities. No one had expected this trip to become national news, but by now she couldn't go anywhere without turning heads at Booker T. Washington Middle School principal Keisha Robles met her at the door, a tall woman with box braids and a soft voice. Robles had worked in Oklahoma public education for over 2 decades. She didn't mention the white, how she just hugged Jasmine and said, "They've been waiting for you in the gym-turned-auditorium." Folding chairs creaked as teachers shifted in their seats. Some clutched notepads. A few had brought their kids, still dressed in their backpacks. And when Jasmine walked in, they clapped, not out of protocol, but out of something more: raw respect. No security, no flashing lights, no advisors whispering in her ear. Just a woman with a folder standing in front of people who understood every word she had said the day before. "I want to start by saying, Jasmine, Began that I didn't go to that round table expecting to make headlines. I went there expecting to be heard. The room stayed. Quiet. A teacher near the front nodded, eyes locked on her, and when I wasn't, I did what any one of you would have done. I spoke. Up anyway, there was no speechwriter behind these lines, no podium, just her voice, and the weight of a country watching after her remarks. She took questions, they were raw and real. A teacher from the North Side asked, "What do we do when the textbooks still say George Bush is president?" Another added, "How do we fight for funds when the state budget's been cut 5 years in a row?" Jasmine didn't give polished answers, she gave honest ones. "I don't have a silver bullet," she said, "but I know this: if we don't make noise, they'll keep pretending we're okay with scraps." It wasn't a rally, it wasn't partisan, it was personal after the event. A student named Eli, maybe 13, waited with his mom. He didn't speak right away, just handed Jasmine a folded note. She opened it back in the car later. In pencil it read, "I didn't think people like you got to talk to the president. I didn't know people like you didn't back down." She read it twice, then held it to her chest. Back in D.C., the media machine kept spinning. Pundits argued over whether she had crossed a line. Editorials flooded in. One headline from the Boston Ledger read, "Jasmine Crockett did what Congress rarely does, tell the truth." Uninvited, meanwhile, support kept pouring in, donations to underfunded schools surged after a teacher from Oregon shared Jasmine's clip alongside her. Amazon wish list: within 24 hours, every item was fulfilled. Other teachers followed, and the same thing happened again and again. Something had cracked open in private. GOP circles, the question wasn't whether Trump overreacted, but whether he'd handed Crockett the kind of visibility no strategist could buy. One advisor reportedly told a reporter off the record, "We wanted to control the narrative, instead we created the headline." Jasmine didn't bask in it. She didn't celebrate. She just kept moving, kept showing up where she'd already committed to be: illiteracy. Workshop in Oklahoma City, a podcast interview with a youth group in Topeka, a visit to a community garden in Wichita. Everywhere she went, people stopped her, not for selfies, not for autographs, but to say things like, "You said what my daughter's been trying to say. You gave my son a reason to stay in school. You made me feel seen." None of it had been planned, and maybe that's why it mattered, but the next few days would show this wasn't just a flash in the pan. Jasmine wasn't trending 2 days after Tulsa. Jasmine was back in Dallas, her apartment tucked above a small bookstore in Oak Cliff. Felt like the only quiet place left on earth the moment she stepped inside. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the floor with her back against the door. She didn't turn on the TV. She didn't even look at her phone. She just let herself be still. It had been nonstop, and while the public saw strength, conviction, and viral clips, what they didn't see was the fatigue creeping behind her eyes, or the tightening in her chest. Each time a new notification buzzed in, she finally stood up, walked over to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out the window outside across the street. Her neighbor's kids were playing basketball in the alley, laughing and shouting like none of it mattered, and for a moment she envied that her mom called just after sunset. "You need to rest," she said gently. "I saw you on the news again this morning. CNN was playing your clip right after the segment on the stock market." Jasmine chuckled dryly. "Guess I'm more volatile than Wall Street." Her mother didn't laugh. "I mean it," she said. "You're carrying a lot right now, and I'm proud of you, but I worry." Jasmine leaned against the counter. "You and every cable host in America know," her mom replied. "They care about the views, care about the girl who used to read speeches into her hairbrush at 8 years old. That one got her." She closed her eyes and smiled. Just for a second later that night, she scrolled through her inbox. Most of it was support letters from teachers, parents, even high school students, but buried in the stack were a handful of threats, anonymous, ugly, filled with slurs and warnings. She forwarded them to security and closed her laptop. This wasn't new. Women in politics, especially black women, get this kind of hate for simply showing up, but it never got easier. It always left a mark the next morning when she showed up at her office. Her assistant Brittany met her at the door with wide eyes. "You're going to want to see this," she said, holding up a printed letter. It was from a retired Army colonel in Pennsylvania, conservative, white, lifelong Republican. He'd written in longhand blue ink on thick paper, "Congresswoman Crockett, didn't vote for you, and I likely never will. But what you did in that room took more strength than I've seen from some of our generals. You didn't raise your voice, you raised a mirror, and whether we like it or not, that mirror is showing us something. We've been trying to ignore. Jasmine read the letter 3 times, then folded it slowly and placed it inside her drawer. People are listening. Brittany said, her voice low. I know, Jasmine replied. Now we just have to figure out what to do with that. Outside the street was quiet, but her inbox wasn't. Her voicemails weren't her. DMs were overflowing. People wanted interviews. Appearances, answers, and through it all, she kept hearing her mother's voice in her head. You're carrying a lot right now. She'd been called disruptive. She'd been called bold. She'd been called a lot of things by now, but what stuck with her most were the words from a woman in Kansas City who left a voicemail late the night before. I'm a bus driver, 59 years old. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen someone walk into that house and speak like you did and then walk out with her head up. That did something to me, please. Don't stop. Jasmine sat at her desk, looking out the window. A group of elementary school kids walked past wearing backpacks twice their size. One of them looked up, pointed at the building, and said, That's where she works. He was right. That's where she worked. And suddenly it didn't feel like just an office. It felt like a responsibility. But with every new spotlight came a shadow, and there were people already working behind the scenes to dim hers by the end of the week. The storm had stopped being just a trending topic. It was a full-blown reckoning. Major outlets were running prime time specials about school funding inequities. A segment on PBS featured the line, Jasmine had delivered in the White House, playing it alongside images of crumbling classrooms, broken desks, and overworked teachers. She hadn't given any more interviews. Not because she was hiding, but because she didn't want her face to replace the issue. The moment had opened a door, and she wanted the voices behind that door to be heard. But the attention wouldn't go away. On Sunday morning, CNN aired a panel called Who Gets to Ask the Hard Questions? They invited educators, former students, and even parents from rural areas across the Midwest. The conversation wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every classroom that had been ignored for decades. It was about how often black women in Congress were labeled aggressive for doing what others get praised for. The country wasn't just reacting, they were reflecting. One moment stood out. A video went viral of a man in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, a retired corrections officer in his 60s, white beard, Vietnam vet cap, sitting on his porch with his dog. His granddaughter filmed him as he spoke directly into the camera. I don't agree with most Democrats, but that lady, she didn't yell, she didn't wave a sign, she just told the truth. And if the truth makes the president that uncomfortable, maybe he ain't doing his job. The clip hit over 10 million views in less than a day. Jasmine's team never reached out to him. He didn't want attention, but his words were repeated by anchors, quoted in articles, and even printed on signs at rallies. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, some Democrats began to get louder. Emboldened, the House Minority Leader mentioned Jasmine by name during a press conference, saying she reminded us what public service is supposed to look like. But behind closed doors, the reaction wasn't all praise. Political operatives close to Trump met in a private strategy session at a golf club in Mar-a-Lago. A memo was passed around detailing a plan to reframe the narrative. One bullet point stood out in bold: portray Rep. Robin Crockett as divisive, uncooperative, and radical. Emphasize lack of solutions. They didn't want to admit she had struck a nerve. They wanted control back, but the problem was people were listening to her now, and they weren't asking for permission to care. At the same time, a group of teachers from East St. Louis started a grassroots campaign. They called it #Classrooms Not Politics, their first move flooding congressional voicemails with personal testimonies, 1 minute each, describing what their schools looked like and what they needed. A math teacher from rural Oklahoma said, "We have one working bathroom for over 200 kids." Representative Crockett asked the right question now. We need answers. A principal in Fresno recorded her message in a dimly lit office at 10:45 p.m., still at school. "I'm here at almost 11 because I don't have enough staff to open tomorrow if I don't prep tonight." That woman wasn't disruptive, she was accurate. And Jasmine, she stayed focused. She met with education advocates. She helped launch a working group in Congress to draft a funding equity proposal. She didn't let the headlines lead her. She led with what she knew was real. One afternoon, she returned to a school in her district that had appeared in one of her early campaign ads. The ceiling tiles Still had water damage, the playground fence was still half bent, but this time there were parents waiting outside. Not to complain, but to thank her, a man stepped forward. Big hands, calloused fingers, paint on his work boots. He introduced himself as Charles. "I got 2 daughters here," he said. "I don't care about politics, but when they saw you on TV standing in that room, they asked me if girls like them could do that too." Jasmine smiled gently. "What did you tell them?" He looked down, then back up. "I told them they could, especially now," but the more traction she gained, the more powerful people started lining up. To push back, the backlash didn't come in one big wave, it trickled in quietly like a slow leak. There were whispers that certain members of her own party were uneasy about how much attention she was getting. Jasmine had broken through in a way most politicians never do, and not everyone liked that an op-ed appeared in a moderate-leaning political journal questioning whether she had jeopardized future bipartisan dialogue by making the roundtable about identity politics. The piece didn't name her directly until the 3rd paragraph, but the implication was obvious. Jasmine read it once, then closed the tab. She'd seen this play before. The pushback always came with polite language and coded warnings: don't speak to, sharply don't ruffle, feathers don't become divisive. But the public wasn't reading it that way across the country. Grassroots organizations started printing her words on T-shirts, school signs, and handmade posters, and Sacramento students staged a walkout at a public high school demanding cleaner classrooms, updated textbooks, and more mental health counselors. They chanted, "If it makes you uncomfortable," good one of their signs had Jasmine's face on it, drawn in pencil, eyes focused, mouth mid-sentence. At the same time, her office received a call from the principal of Lincoln Elementary in Tulsa, the school she had visited just a week earlier. "We'd like to invite Congresswoman Crockett back," she said. "The kids, they talk about her like she's a superhero." And so she went. When Jasmine returned, it wasn't a media event, no podium, no press pass. Just her, a few staffers, and a school full of kids who couldn't believe someone from TV was walking down their hallway. One 3rd grade girl named Tamika stood in front of the library and asked, "Are you scared when you talk in front of powerful people?" Jasmine knelt down, smiled, and said, "Every single time, but I do it anyway." That answer spread faster than any tweet. Teachers turned it into a classroom poster. But something deeper was happening. Jasmine's story had shifted. It wasn't about Trump anymore. It wasn't even about that one room. It had become a mirror for a much bigger question. Who gets to speak? Who gets to challenge? Who gets to be heard without being removed? Back in Dallas, she met with a group of high school seniors working on college essays. One of them, a boy named Andre, had watched her clip so many times he could quote it by heart. "I want to be like that," he said. "Not just mad, just right." And not afraid. Later that evening, she sat in her apartment, lights low, flipping through handwritten letters. One came from a woman in Vermont who ran a home daycare. "I cried when you said it," the letter read. "I've cried so many times over these kids, knowing the system doesn't care. I don't have political words. Just thank you." Jasmine folded the letter, stared at it for a long time, then placed it gently in a box marked "Keep." Meanwhile, the same conservative strategist who helped write the memo against her was on a podcast, now downplaying her influence. "She's a flash. This isn't a movement, it's a moment, but moments, Jasmine knew, can turn into something else if they don't go away." At a Sunday evening forum in St. Louis, she took the stage for a town hall. No teleprompter, no script. "There's a reason that people are reacting the way they are," she said, pacing slowly in front of the crowd. "It's not about me, it's about the silence they've had to sit through for years. The silence in classrooms, the silence in city council meetings, the silence when budgets are cut and no one explains why." She paused. "I was told I disrupted that room, but if asking why kids still go to schools with broken windows is disruptive, then maybe disruption is overdue." The applause wasn't polite, it was real. It came from the gut in the back. A grandmother in a blue sweater wiped her eyes with a tissue and whispered to her daughter, "She's saying what we've been yelling for years, just louder." But as her message spread, so did the pressure from party leaders, from donors, from those afraid. Her voice was starting to reshape the conversation in ways they couldn't control. 2 weeks after the White House roundtable, Jasmine Crockett stood in a packed auditorium at Normandy High School in North St. Louis. The lighting wasn't great, the sound system cut in and out, and the folding chairs squeaked every time someone shifted, but none of that mattered. The place was full: parents, students, teachers, even folks from nearby counties, who had heard she was speaking and came out just to listen. There was no campaign banner, no flashy slogan, just a woman in a blazer and jeans standing in front of a mic, holding a stack of handwritten notes. She barely looked at. She didn't need a script. She had lived this, my first classroom. She began had missing ceiling tiles and a blackboard. So scratched up we used notebook paper instead. My science teacher brought in light bulbs from home. It's just so we could run an experiment. A few nods in the crowd, others murmured softly, the kind of sound people make when they've seen the same thing. I didn't grow up thinking I'd one day walk into the White House. But I also didn't think I'd still be talking about broken bathrooms and kids without pencils. 25 years later, she paused, letting the silence breathe. That day at the round table, I asked a question, a simple one, and some folks thought it was too direct too. It's uncomfortable, but here's the truth. Asking why your school has no heat shouldn't make people nervous. It should make them fix it. That line earned the first round of full applause. Not the kind meant to flatter, but the kind people give when something lands hard. Jasmine took a sip of water. She looked at the faces in the front row, young and old, tired and hopeful. What I've learned since then is this: people will try to shrink you, especially when you speak without permission, especially when you speak about things they'd rather ignore. She stepped away from the mic for a second, just enough to move closer to the edge of the stage. I didn't go viral because I said something fancy. I went viral because people are tired of watching their kids get the leftovers, tired of walking into schools that look like abandoned buildings, tired of waiting for someone in a suit to care. From the side of the room, a teacher clapped. First, then others followed, even the students. Some leaning on the backs of chairs started nodding along. Jasmine smiled, but just slightly. I don't want to be a symbol, she said. I want to be useful. She looked directly at the crowd now, her voice steady. If you're a student, ask the questions, even the ones they don't want you to ask. Especially those, if you're a parent, show up. Not just when it's easy, when it's hard. And if you're a teacher, keep speaking, keep documenting, keep pushing, even if no one's listening right now. Then she closed her notes and looked out across the room one more time. I got removed from a meeting, but I wasn't silenced. I was amplified, because what they forgot is this truth echoes. And once it's out, you can't stuff it back. In the room stood as one, no music, no fanfare, just people on their feet, clapping and yelling and whistling, because somehow they just witnessed something honest in a world built on deflection. Outside the auditorium that night, an older man stopped her as she walked to the car. He wore a maintenance uniform with a name tag that read Ronnie. I saw it, he said. Simply. Jasmine stopped and turned toward him. I saw what you said. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't act crazy. You just asked the question no one else wanted to answer. I respect that. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded, then added, my granddaughter wants to be a teacher. I want her to know she matters before she ever walks in that classroom. Jasmine looked him in the eyes. She does, and don't let anybody tell her different, he smiled. I won't. As she got into the car, she didn't look at her phone. She didn't check the mentions. She just sat there for a moment, letting the night settle. She had spoken her truth, not for the clicks, not for the camera, but for the kids who don't have the luxury of waiting another decade for someone to care. And if that made some people uncomfortable, so be it. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, keep the conversation alive. And if you are not already, subscribe for more stories that challenge the silence and lift the voices that matter most.